Hello and welcome to Elite Wine and Whiskey. Today we're continuing to talk about the heritage of Scotch whisky, this time with the drinking heritage, how it's been drunk through the years and how we got to where we are today. So where do we begin? Distillation didn't start in Scotland, far from it, but when it did reach Scotland it found a thirsty populace. When we talk about the early days of drinking, it's very different to now. Beer would have been distilled to spirit for drinking but also for chemistry and medicine. The spirit that was reserved for drinking was not aged in oak to flavour it. Instead, it was flavoured with what people could find. Hector Bose, a Scottish philosopher and historian living between the 15th and 16th centuries, wrote in the History and Chronicles of Scotland, "When my ancestors were determined of a set purpose to be merry, they used an aqua vitae, void of all spice and only consisting of such herbs and roots as grew in their own gardens." People were drinking this early form of whiskey, flavouring it however they could. Hector's mention of ancestors also goes far to show that they were drinking it this way before his time, and if other people were following the example of Hector's ancestors, they will be flavouring the spirit with all different types of herbs, giving all manner of flavoured drinks. A great example is the hot toddy. Honey, citrus, whiskey and hot water, it's simple to make, tasty, and had the benefit of being a known cure-all. It doesn't stop with Hector. Further examples tell us of different flavourings, using cinnamon, cloves, saffron, licorice and more, all to flavour the spirit. In parts of the country, whiskey is being drunk in this way, while in other parts it is being drunk straight. While still unaged as we would know it today, new make spirit was being drunk. In 1703, Martin would write of his trip to the Western Islands of Scotland, and that they took their drink straight and unflavoured. Whether this is down to their preference for the drink as it was, or if they were unable to source the herbs and spices for flavouring, is unknown, but we can see clear styles in which whiskey was drunk that mirror the ways it is drunk today. Something good to address is the question of why. Why were people drinking beer and why were they distilling it and then drinking the spirit? It's what they had on hand. While those in Europe and in London would drink wine and cognac, especially the rich, the poorer areas and those further away from ports and trading areas would make do with what they had on hand. Barley and other grains grow easier in Scotland, while grapes, not so much. So making a beer from what you have is easier than spending a large sum on a bottle of wine. Think of it as Hector's ancestors did. They would make alcohol consisting of what they had in their gardens. So why were the high folk of London drinking cognac and soda? Well, it's tasty for one, but it's also a status symbol. They could afford to show their wealth in this manner, so they did. The next major stepping stone for drinking whiskey would be with the blenders. Different distilleries focused on different styles. While today we celebrate this, we have the advantage of being able to order online, and we have the advantage of consistency. Years ago, whiskey from the same distillery might taste different batch to batch, but with blenders they were making styles suited to consumption. In 1853, a law was changed allowing malt whiskies to be blended under bond, and in 1860, that law again changed to allow for the blending of malt and grain whiskies. This was the advent of the blenders we celebrate today. John Walker in Kilmarnock, George Ballantyne in Edinburgh, the Chivas brothers of Aberdeen. These blends were incredibly popular. They were consistent, smooth, flavourful, and easily accessible. They were so popular that they forced shifts in the style of whiskey being produced at distilleries. Lighter, sweeter, unsmoked whiskies were desired by the blenders, and as such, distilleries changed to meet that. Moving forward, blenders would begin to make blends to taste large areas. If a certain flavour of blended whiskey sold better in one place, then a blend would be made to best suit that flavour. This is all helped by the decimation of the cognac industry by phylloxera. With cognac now in short supply and not knowing when the industry would recover, whiskey would replace cognac as the drink of choice through the middle and upper class, both in its straight form and with the highball, scotch and soda. Everyone is now drinking whiskey. Next up was one of Scotch whiskey's biggest challenges, the American Prohibition. With Prohibition coming in, a market was drying up. While imports into America understandably fell, countries around America were recording record numbers of Scotch imports. Smuggling became the name of the game. While America did not drink more in this period than they had before, spirits consumption were at a high. Some that was labelled as Scotch whisky was no more than coloured and flavoured spirits poured into a bottle, but true Scotch whisky was gaining a name, as was the way in which it was being drunk. Of course, it was still drunk straight, but given the aforementioned fake Scotch was often blended into cocktails, the real McCoy was being turned into cocktails as well. Scotch whisky was gaining a reputation for high quality and good taste, and after the end of Prohibition, American distilleries were in rude health, so Scotch continued to be drunk by many. The Second World War would hit the industry hard, but a lover of Scotch whisky no less than Winston Churchill had his own say to help keep the industry intact. On no account, reduce the barley for whisky. This takes years to mature and is an invaluable export and dollar producer. American servicemen, already with a taste for Scotch whisky, would find that taste growing after being stationed through Europe and seeing leave in Britain. Unfortunately, this wouldn't last, with Scotch gaining a reputation as a drink for the upper class, clad in tweed and seated in leather armchairs. Whether or not was the time for it, single malts began to be marketed and emphasised at the start of the 60s. Now, single malts had been available to purchase for some time, but a marketing shift saw a focus on single malts begin to occur. Glenfiddich kicked it off, and the term moved through pure malt, straight malt, and finally onto single malt. In some ways, it leaned into the idea that whisky was for the well-to-do, single malts especially, while blends began to gain a reputation for being for the lower class. There is, however, no denying that the likes of Glenfiddich, Glenlivet, and Macallan single malts would change whisky forever. A drink that was more and more marketed towards those with wealth, it was not in Scotland that Scotch would see a change in how it was drunk, but around the world. In the early 21st century, people began drinking Scotch with Coke or ginger ale, the highball of the 18th century changing to suit the palate of those that whisky had struggled to capture, the younger demographic. From 18 to 30, people began to drink whisky with mixers. Suddenly the alcohol was there, but flavours that might be too harsh were covered. As these drinkers continued to move on, so would they start to experiment with whisky. Some turning to drink it straight, others through cocktails, and others in that same highball that saw Scotch take the world. In today's world, whisky is being drunk in more different ways, in more different places, by more different people than ever before. Whether you prefer your whisky straight, blended, with a mixer, in a cocktail, from Scotland or further abroad, whisky is being drunk and enjoyed by everyone everywhere. Once again, whisky is here to stay, but it shows no sign of slowing down and continues to grow every day. It's time to have a dram and toast to its success. Sláinte.